Hi, this is Ellen from the Chili Dog, and this is the second video in a two-part series where I'll show you how to knit a shadow-wrapped short row sock heel. In part 1, I demonstrated how to make a twin stitch on both the right and wrong sides of a knit sock, and we made the first half of the heel. The pattern I'm making calls for 11 twin stitches at each side of the heel and 10 just regular stockinette stitches at the center. So right now I have it divided across 3 double pointed needles so that you can kind of see the more rounded shape that the heel is getting. But as we continue on, I'm going to return to working the heel across just 2 needles. The most important thing to remember as you begin the second half of the heel is that you must have the same number of twin stitches on each side of the heel. If you have more stitches or less stitches on one side than the other, that means you made a mistake somewhere and either added in an extra twin or didn't work enough twins, and you need to go back and fix your work before you continue on. So now let's continue on with the first right side row of the second half of the heel. And to do that, we're just going to knit across until we reach the first twin stitch on the other side of the heel. And you may recall that as we were working the first half of the sock, each row of the heel was getting shorter and shorter because we were working one less stitch on each row. For the second half of the sock, the rows are going to get longer and longer because we're going to work one extra stitch on each row. So I've worked across to the first twin stitch. I'm going to get rid of that third needle just because it's easier for me personally to work on 2 needles instead of 3. And now that we've reached that first twin, all we're going to do is consider both strands that are coming out, the twins. We're going to consider them as one single stitch and work both strands together. Well, my yarn split there just a little bit. Okay, so you work both strands together. Then for the next twin, before we turn our work, we're going to turn that twin stitch into a triplet stitch. And the technique is basically the same as when we were making twins. You simply lift the right leg of the strand below the twin, or the stitch below the twin, lift it up onto the left needle. I like to put my fingernail there in between the stitches so that they don't slip together. You're going to knit into that lifted strand and then just slip your knit stitch right back onto the left needle. So now you can see there's actually 3 stitches coming out of the lower one, so it's a triplet now instead of a twin. So we'll turn our work and continue on. And on the wrong side of our sock, we're just going to purl across until we reach that first triplet, or the first twin stitch. And as I said in the first video, the nice thing about this technique, or one of the nice things about this technique, is that really you don't have to do any counting. You should be able to easily see your twin and triplet stitches so you know where to turn your work. So if I've purled to the first twin, and now with that twin stitch, again, we're just going to consider both strands of the twin as a single stitch, and we're going to purl them together. And then we need to make a triplet out of the next twin. So you start by slipping both strands of the twin onto from your left to your right needle. You're going to lift the left leg of that stitch below, purl into that lifted leg, and then slip all 3 strands back onto the left needle. And we turn our work. And again, you can see now there's 3 strands coming out of that lower stitch, so it's a triplet now. So I'm going to work 2 more rows of the heel just so you can see one more time how to make the triplet stitches. So we're just going to knit across until we reach that triplet stitch on the other side. And one thing that's really important to remember when you are either reach the triplet stitches or when you're making your triplet stitches and you have to slide from one needle to the other is just to make sure that you've got all 3 strands and that you don't accidentally drop one somehow. It's kind of easy to do if you're not paying attention. So I've knit across all the way to my next triplet stitch. I'm just going to consider all 3 of those strands as a single stitch, and I'm going to knit them all together. And then I'm going to make a triplet stitch in the next twin. So you lift the right leg up, lift it up onto your left needle, knit into that lifted stitch, and slip the knit stitch back onto your left needle. So there's 3, so now it's a triplet. Turn your work and purl across until you reach the next triplet. Once you get all the way across here to the next triplet, there now. Once you get to the next triplet, you just consider all 3 strands of that triplet as a single stitch, and you purl all 3 strands together. And again, make sure that you are actually working through all 3 strands. It's very easy to miss one. And then we need to make the next twin into a triplet. So slip the twin onto your right needle, lift up the left leg of the stitch below, purl into that stitch, and slip the triplet back onto your left needle. So to finish off the rest of the heel shaping, on the right side, you'll always just knit across until you get to the triplet stitch. When you get to the triplet, you work all 3 strands as a single stitch and knit them together, and then you're going to turn your next twin into a triplet. Turn your work over, and then you'll purl across until you reach the triplet. Work all 3 strands of the triplet as a single stitch and purl them together, and make the next stitch that is a twin and turn it into a triplet. And you'll keep doing that when working back and forth until you have 1 twin stitch on each side of the sock heel, and all the remaining stitches in the center are going to be stockinette stitches. And I have a sample where I'm at that point. So this was my last wrong side row of my heel. So as you can see, I have 1 triplet stitch on this side. All of the stitches in the center are just regular purled stockinette stitches, and now I have just made my last triplet stitch on the other side. And it's time for me to slip that stitch back onto the left needle and turn my work. And from this point, you're starting the leg of your sock, and you'll begin working in rounds again, just like you did on the foot. The only difference is, as you're working the first round or 2, whenever you reach a triplet stitch, so you'll work across the back of the heel, when you reach this first triplet stitch on the other side, whatever stitch your pattern calls for you to make, you're going to work all 3 strands of that triplet together as a single stitch. Then you'll continue on around with the top of your sock. And then again, whatever stitch your pattern calls for, when you reach this next triplet stitch, you'll work all 3 strands of that triplet. Let me get this my working yarn out of the way. You'll work all 3 strands of that triplet together as a single stitch. So I hope you've enjoyed learning how to make a shadow wrapped short row heel. Let me lay it out here so you can kind of see how the finished heel looks. It has a nice rounded shape. And I hope you'll give this technique a try in your next knit sock pattern. And until next time, happy knitting!